Here's another one who realizes Miami's got a talented roster this year. The Hurricanes have just been named one of the top 10 teams most likely to make it to their first college football playoff in 2025.
You are Locked On Canes, your daily podcast on the Miami Hurricanes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Friday. We made it. I am Alex Donno, University of Miami alumnus, co-host of Locked On ACC and host of Postgame on the Miami Hurricanes radio network. And thank you so much to the everydayers for making Locked On Canes your first listen. We're available free wherever you get your podcasts. We're free on YouTube. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. On this Locked On Canes, we're going to talk preview content. Phil Steele has his preseason publication out. So does Pick 6. Now, Pick 6 actually ranks Miami highest of all of these preseason previews. So we'll talk about that with Phil Rusomano, who's going to join us a little bit later on. I'll give you my most underrated Miami Hurricanes, players that they're not talking about and they should be. But how about this for an expectation? I mentioned Miami poised to be a team to make it to the college football playoff for the first time. And folks, this is via Joel Klatt. Now, Joel Klatt, who you remember in 2005 was knocked into 2025 by John Beeson. If he's saying anything nice about Miami, you take it to the bank. So he's got his top 10 teams most likely to make their first college football playoff. He's got Illinois at number 1. He's Big Ten guy. He's got to show that Big Ten love. Ole Miss, South Carolina at 2 and 3. Miami at number 4. Then Iowa, Missouri, USC at 7. Kansas State, Florida at number 9. And Nebraska at number 10. So he believes this could be, and I believe it should be, the year that the Miami Hurricanes make their first college football playoff. And on the Hurricanes, Klatt says, quote, they hired a new defensive coordinator this offseason, Corey Heatherman, from a guy that I've covered and I really respect, Klatt said. Again, Big Ten guy, so he's very aware of what Heatherman did at Minnesota last year, where he took their defense from number 69 in the country to top 5 in the country in one season. That's what you call waving a magic wand. He's going to try to do that with Miami's defense, and he is aided by the fact that, not only is Heatherman a hell of a football coach, but Miami also went out and improved their defensive personnel. Klatt continued, I think he's a really good defensive coordinator. I think Heatherman, fits what Cristobal wants to do. The biggest question for Miami, at least in my estimation, Joel Klatt says, is Carson Beck. All right, so Carson Beck is Klatt's biggest question. And the reason why is, Klatt, he feels that, for a guy who hasn't thrown in a game situation since December, spent some time on the injury list, had surgery, had to recover from that, wasn't fully available for spring football at Miami. He feels that there are some question marks in terms of Beck returning to full fitness, Beck putting the injury behind him, staying healthy. Now, my personal expectation, and this is based on, and obviously Joel Klatt is trying to monitor 133 plus teams nationally. My focus is primarily on Miami. So I'm probably hearing more feedback on the offseason workouts than Joel Klatt is. No disrespect intended, of course. But my expectations for Beck have been going up over the past couple of months based on the feedback that we hear from his offseason workouts. Things are going very well, and we don't have any injury concerns right now in terms of the elbow he's recovering from. Now, of course, football is a dangerous game. Quarterback can be a dangerous position. You're always at risk of getting injured. And, we worry a little bit about Miami's backup quarterback situation. But in terms of Carson Beck, the injury he's recovering from and his progress coming out of it with very productive throwing sessions the last couple of months, he's been very engaged in the film room and learning the new offense. Shannon Dawson's been very impressed. I don't have those same concerns about Carson Beck that Joel Klatt does, but I get where Klatt's coming from, because for Beck, doing it in pads with a pass rush with live bullets flying in real games is different from what he's doing in workouts right now. But I think my biggest concerns, first of those things being, and I appreciate and I agree with what Klatt said about Corey Heatherman and Miami's defense. I believe in Heatherman, and I believe that defense is going to be much better this year. The bar was pretty low last year. You can only get better after what we saw last season. But I guess and this is not so much a concern, but a question mark is changing the defensive identity from one year to the next. Now, thankfully, in the case of Heatherman, he's got a scheme that plays very well into the instincts of Miami's personnel. And there are a lot of positionless elements, which I think make it very exciting. And I think his philosophy on the pass rush is going to fit guys like Ruben Bain and Akeem Mesidor on Miami's defensive line and so on. And I also think in terms of personnel upgrades, I think now Corey Heatherman has superior athletes, especially in that defensive secondary, adding guys like Zechariah Poiser, Keontae Scott, Xavier Lucas, Muhammad Toure, Kamal Bonner at linebacker, just to name a few. There are others. Now, on the offensive side, you talk about concerns or question marks. The wide receiver room, until proven otherwise, is a question mark because you lost your top 6 pass catchers from last year. But I think the talent in that room gets me really excited. This is a unit that I expect to exceed expectations. And again, going back to offseason workout feedback, a handful of Miami's receivers are turning heads with their offseason work. We'll see more of that July 31st and so on when fall camp begins. CJ Daniels, transferred in from LSU, has made an impact since arriving. He's a 6-year senior with a lot of leadership and a lot of talent. JoJo Trader, who's young, just waiting for his opportunity, looks like a wide receiver 1 in practice. He's going to have a chance to go out there and prove it. There are true freshmen that we rave about. I mean, one of these certainly doesn't look like a true freshman. If you see the build and the physical maturity of Joshua Moore, 6'4", 215 range, he looks like a second or a third year guy. Malachi Toney, of course, with his shiftiness and what he produced in the spring, they look like freshmen that are ready to play. A couple of other additions that I haven't really seen yet because Miami added these guys after spring football, but they've been engaged in the workouts. Keelan Marion and Tony Johnson. Tony Johnson, an experienced slot guy from Cincinnati. Keelan Marion, one of the most dynamic kick returners in the country. And by the way, not to look too far ahead on my agenda for today's show, but you know, an area that the Phil Steele magazine rates Miami very poorly is special teams. I think Keelan Marion is going to go a long way to improving that. Steele has Miami rated a little below average, 67th nationally in special teams. Now, of course, kicking, punting, coverage, all this stuff goes into that. Miami does have a change of kicker. You go from the last Borregales to Bert Auburn, who, is good percentages coming out of Texas. But Miami, last several years, hasn't produced much in terms of the return game. It was 2 years ago. Rashard Smith, returned that kickoff for a touchdown against Texas A&M. Of course, he hasn't been a Cane for a couple of years. We haven't had much in terms of the return game. Keelan Marion is a guy who flips fields and returns kicks to the house for a living. So I think he's going to go a long way to improving that. But these are individual players and individual units. If you were to ask me, my biggest concern, it's more of a big picture thing. Top concern for Miami is, until proven otherwise, because it has been for a number of years, finding overall consistency over the course of 12 games, not slipping on those banana peels in conference play. And of course, Miami has a couple of gigantic non-conference games this season against Notre Dame to start the year, against Florida week 4. You want to win both of those, or at least impress in both of those games if you were to split those games. But, nowadays, when it comes to the criteria to make the college football playoff, winning your conference, or at least coming second place in your conference, is at a premium. And we need to stop the nonsense like blowing a 21-point lead to Syracuse last year when you seemingly had the orange on the ropes. Miami, Georgia Tech was a pretty good team last year. They took Georgia to 8 overtimes, for example, but Miami did not look good, and they didn't look prepared in that Georgia Tech game last year. And Hurricanes have had a history. This is a team that's only played in the conference championship game once in 2 decades. We have a history slipping on banana peels, underperforming in certain conference games we should win. So finding that overall consistency. Now, of course, it starts with your talent and it starts with your physicality. Winning battles consistently at the line of scrimmage is going to help. And Miami's got one of the best one of the best offensive lines in the country, and hopefully one of the better defensive lines in the country because they have a lot of talent there. So I know that, actually winning these individual battles is going to help your consistency, but I think the mental toughness is also going to play into that because Miami has lost way too many games they should win in recent years. So those would be my big concerns. But I am happy that Joel Klatt and others are taking notice that Miami is a team that could and should contend at the very least for a college football playoff spot this year. Now, I've been thinking a lot about players that not only me, but others don't talk about enough, right? Because, folks, we've been in the dog days of the offseason. Now, we've had a lot of recruiting to talk about, and Miami got a big win last night, or yesterday afternoon, I should say, with Samori Wingo, 4-star wide receiver. Hurricanes beat Florida and South Carolina for him. We put out an episode for Wingo. Make sure you watch it or listen to it, Locked on Canes podcast, because we had a lot of fun talking about Wingo. But when it comes to actual preseason, getting ready for 2025 material, I realize I'm sometimes guilty of talking about the same players, the same, couple dozen guys over and over and over again. There are certain Canes I don't think we talk about enough. Let's talk underrated. You want to keep it locked right here. We're only getting started on this brand new episode of Locked on Canes. Folks, we all need to manage our money and build our wealth. And if you ever wish managing your money felt easier, with Monarch Money, it can. Whether you're growing your savings or planning a big purchase, Monarch puts you in the driver's seat. It's like having your own personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Guys, Monarch Money is more than just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So in addition to managing your money, you're also building wealth. Folks, Monarch has helped me so much. First of all, it puts all of my finances and financial records in one place, which takes a lot of headaches away. And it's helped me realize how much I'm spending and overspending, or at least was, on things like food delivery and every single streaming service. Spoiler alert, I don't need all of them. I found that out thanks to Monarch Money, and it helps you take control. So take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCollege at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. It's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCollege for half off your first year. Thank you for making Locked on Canes your first listen and your first watch. For the everydayers, if you want to take your everydayer experience to the next level, click the link in the show description below. Become a Locked on Canes insider. You get text messages directly from my phone to yours, one-on-one questions and answers, breaking news, recruiting scoops. We were all over Samori Wingo yesterday on the Insiders chat. Miami landed another one. They landed a good one. Try it free for 14 days. Become a Locked on Canes insider. And then if you like it, you can opt in for $4.99 a month. Give you a lot of added value on there on the Locked on Canes Insiders chat. All right, so I mentioned in the Phil Steele magazine, Miami's special teams, and I get it because last year, outside of Andy Borregales being money, Miami's special teams were underwhelming last year. So Phil Steele has them ranked 67th nationally. Other units, though, play out pretty well for Steele. He's got Miami's quarterback room ranked 9th. Now, keep in mind, that's the quarterback room, not just Carson Beck. So, if Miami had maybe a more proven backup situation, and I believe in my guy, Emory Williams, and I think that he's capable of being much better than he was in the Pop-Tarts Bowl. But I get it that the stock is down on the rest of the room. But Carson Beck leads Miami to the 9th-rated quarterback room, according to Phil Steele. At running back, I think they're a little underrated at number 16. And I'll tell you why in a second. But 16th rated running back room, 23rd rated wide receiver room. I get it. They're unproven. In fact, 23rd, Phil could have probably even gone lower than that if he really wanted to, but I think he probably believes in the talent in that room for Miami. Defensive line, he rates them 11th nationally. Offensive line, 6th nationally. I think they could end up being a top 5 unit, but they have to prove that. Linebacker, he's got them 26. Now, Miami's made some important additions there. Kamal Bonner and Mohamed Toure, joining, guys like Wesley Besaint and Popo Aguirre and Bobby Pruitt, who returned from last year. Kiko was the big loss from that room. Also, Jalen Alderman, who's like a 5th or a 6th-year guy right now, is back, which is good for experience there. So linebackers 26, defensive backs 24th. Now, compared to what Miami did at the defensive backfield last year, you'll take 24th because there's a lot of new guys there, right? All the transfers Miami brought in, plus O.J. Frederick returning, who was the bright spot of that defensive backfield. So I will take 24th for the defensive back room. And then I mentioned special teams at 67th. Now, I mentioned there are players that we talk about a lot here on Locked On Canes and other platforms. Here are some players, and a few of these names I do mention from time to time, but players I think are getting slept on heading into this 2025 season, who I believe are going to be big-time contributors for Miami, and nobody's talking about them. Because when I read through it, we'll talk again with our guy Phil in a few minutes. We'll talk about the Pick 6 preview. But when I read through all these previews, people will talk about Mark Fletcher and Jordan Lyle. Miami's got this running back duo. I strongly believe it's a preview. It's a trio. I strongly believe it's a trio, not a duo in Miami's backfield. And so the first name I'm going to mention is an underrated Cane, and people are going to find out, is Chamar Brown, Marty Brown, who transferred in from North Dakota State. The young man put up as I think a redshirt freshman last year, 1,200 rushing yards, 15 touchdowns en route to an FCS national title at North Dakota State. He was a big part of that championship winning team last year. And he's not only a complete runner, but he's a power runner at 5'11", 215 pounds. You talk about Mario Cristobal's crystal ball, like the football he likes to play. Running backs in that mold, Chamar Brown is perfect for the Miami Hurricanes backfield. And yeah, we talk about him as maybe being the third back, but who knows? There could be certain games where Brown is your second or first leading rusher. It's going to depend on matchups. It's going to depend on who's hot, riding the hot hand back there. But I think Chamar Brown is not getting talked about nearly enough. There's a couple members of the offensive line who I think deserve more love. Now, Francis Mauigoa deserves all the love that he's getting. He's the headline maker of that room. He's a projected first-round draft pick. So I take nothing away from CC. He deserves all the love he's getting. But Markel Bell and Inez Cooper do not get talked about enough. We'll start with Big Bell. 6'9", 340 pounds, and he's not just a big body. The experience he got last year playing, at least 2/3, if not 3/4 of the season last year, a lot of those starting at left tackle was invaluable for him, that experience. Markel Bell is not just a big body. He's looking more polished than ever when it comes to his technique and his footwork. He works very hard. He takes football very seriously. And then you got my guy, Inez Cooper. I don't know what this guy has to do to get talked about more. Maybe it's just because he plays right guard and it's not a glamour position. But Inez Cooper has been an unsung hero on Miami's offensive line for the past 3 seasons. And by the way, Big Coop is also a big-time leader in that locker room. So don't think this is just some guy who's kind of hanging out and busting skulls on Saturdays. Inez Cooper is one of the players' leadership council, and he sets the tone for his teammates. So he should be talked about a lot more. Ahmad Moten is one I think deserves more love. This is someone who really broke out at defensive tackle over the second half of last year, finished the season with 18 tackles, 3.5 TFL, and a sack. And, if Moten can pick up from where he left off in the final handful of games from last year, I think he's going to be really good. Miami probably has a top 3-man rotation at defensive tackle that I have high expectations for. Transfer David Blay, Justin Scott, the 5-star who's heading into his second year, and Ahmad Moten, who's like a 4th or a 5th year junior, I think, by this point. He's been in the program for a while, and I think this is the year where Ahmad Moten, over the course of 12-plus games, really takes the next step. I'll give you another one. I don't talk about this player enough. I should talk about him more. Nye Carr at wide receiver. Now, the fact that Carr nearly left Miami, remember, he did briefly enter the transfer portal, but then he decided to stay. When that happens, that tells me Miami's coaching staff really values Carr. This was not a player, because sometimes when players hit the portal, maybe it's a mutual thing, or maybe the staff kind of, you don't have to go home, but you can't stay here, sort of thing. That was not the case with Nye Carr. They wanted Carr to stay, and Carr was convinced to stay at Miami because there is a clear plan for him on the field and with his development. That's a great sign for me. He's young, hasn't gotten on the field much. He's just heading into his second year, but Carr has practiced well, and he's got something important, and that's the flexibility to play in the slot or on the outside. I brought up Carr's name yesterday when we were talking about Samori and Wingo, who Miami just landed in recruiting, because there are similar traits there. With Wingo, something that Miami staff really likes about the 4-star receiver out of St. Augustine is his versatility, can play multiple spots in the receiving core. With Carr, it's the same thing. You have that positional versatility, which I think adds extra value for him. So that's someone I'm going to watch out for this year. And another name, hear a lot of good things about him. I watched him play well in spring football when I was out there at practice, and we hear good things about the offseason workouts, is Marquise Lightfoot on the edge. Heading into his second year, his name keeps coming up as someone turning heads in practices and workouts. Another quick recruiting note. I mentioned Miami landed Samori and Wingo yesterday. They still, of course, have a top 10 class. Like, the class temporarily moved into 9th, and then somebody else must have landed somebody, and they're back down to number 10. Hurricanes have a top 10 class, Samori and Wingo. And Miami is also seeing, now I know, to be fair, because a lot of folks will bring up when 24/7 Sports, when they occasionally will downgrade players that are committed to Miami. Sometimes it goes the other way. So I give them credit, because Joel Irvin, offensive tackle out of Fort Myers, who, of course, the one everyone talks about is Jackson Cantwell, top player in the class. But Joel Irvin is hell of an offensive tackle, and he's actually moving up in the 24/7 rankings. He's now considered what they call a top 24/7 player, which is literally the top 247 prospects. He's ranked 208th overall in the class, and he's rated as the 16th best offensive lineman. He's got his 4th star. Joel Irvin stands 6'5.5", 330 pounds. And, some of the attributes for him, he's an excellent run blocker. His high school program, I don't think, passes the football a whole lot, but he definitely has the skills and the traits to become a really good pass blocker as well. He's got a really big wingspan, long arms, even for his size. It's 6'5.5". So there's going to be a lot of good stuff for Alex Mirabal to work with when Joel Irvin gets to campus. So congratulations to Joel, because I see this man continually impressing scouts when they look at him in person and moving up the rankings. And this is a guy that's been committed to Miami for quite some time. Miami got in very early on Irvin with their evaluations, and now the rest of America is catching up and upgrading him accordingly. So good stuff there. All right, we mentioned a few of the Phil Steele rankings. Pick 6 actually has Miami rated higher than any of the other publications. To help us break that down, my paisan, Phil Rusomano, is going to join us next. You want to keep it locked right here. We're not done yet on Locked On Canes. Happy to be joined by my paisan, Phil Rusomano. Phil, I just came back from Italy. It's like I just want to surround myself with Italians since I returned. So that's why we had to bring you back on. How are you?
Doing great. How are you doing, Donno?
I'm doing really well, and I know you're an expert on this the Pick 6 preview, which I think is a good one for us to break down from a Miami point of view, because as I mentioned, Pick 6 has Miami rated higher than the other big, the Phil Steeles and the Lindys and Athlon. Pick 6 is a little bit more bullish on Miami, having them 9th in the country. Why do you think Pick 6? What is it about them where they seem to feel a little bit more confident about Miami than the rest?
So I think what's interesting is Pick 6 has been known as the most accurate one of these like preseason magazines. So they take a more holistic approach to it by using something called Game Score. What's interesting is that they kind of like project about where they expect like the defense to be, where the offense to be, certain like things that are saying like the coaching staff saying together, like for the offensive side, and what the impact could be of a new defensive coordinator in Corey Heatherman. So they kind of take a holistic approach, but what they're like projecting really is like the culmination of a really strong portal season, and then also a strong base that we had with our offense from last year.
So what part of the offense, in terms of like, let's say their opinions on Carson Beck in the quarterback room, let's start with that. Where do they stand there?
What's interesting is that they don't have him as a top 3 quarterback in the ACC. So, which was like a very interesting point for it. But the good thing that they're kind of backing that up with is that our offensive line's rated really strongly. They're actually rated 3rd in the entire country for their like different like team like ratings for it. So it's definitely a like really strong boost to have that offensive line. But the way that they're like viewing Carson Beck is they want to see like how he's going to respond from the injury. So there's a lot more like talent to be gained there long term, but they didn't account for it yet, which is honestly a positive sign for Miami.
Now, one of the things I'm always curious about is their view on Miami's receiver core, because my take on it, Phil, I think there's a ton of talent there and a ton of, unrealized potential, but I can understand, scrutinizing it a little bit since Miami lost like their top 6 pass catchers from last year. So we're going to be breaking in a lot of new weapons.
Oh yeah, and they really echo the same like sentiment that you have for that. A lot of it comes from having the new additions of CJ Daniels, having Marion coming in. They view him as more of a receiver as in addition to the kick returner that he is. So it's going to be interesting to see how that translates. But they really highlight the young talent, the Malachi Tonys, the JoJo Traders, all those like new up and coming young receivers that are going to get their shot this year.
Awesome. Who do you think is going to have the biggest year in the receiving core this year, Phil?
I would think JoJo would, but I mean, that's like kind of a standard answer. If not him, I have been hearing a lot of good things about CJ Daniels, and I think that transition into Miami system is going to be a really good one for him too.
Now, going over to the defense, and, I was talking earlier in this episode about, Joel Klatt, of all people, he still remembers that John Beeson hit.
Oh, yeah.
But he was actually, talking very favorably about Corey Heatherman. Klatt is a Big Ten guy, and, he covered Heatherman when he was at Minnesota. What's the temperature on pick 6 when it comes to Miami's D that's going to try to turn things around drastically from last year?
Yeah, they highlighted that we had a major improvement in talent with our transfer portal this most recent year, and they actually have 2 All-American transfer, like on their All-American transfer team. They had Torre listed and Xavier Lucas, which is interesting that it's that too, because Poised was actually an All-American last year as a freshman All-American. So they definitely see the addition in talent coming through, and they're projecting with this new system that's a lot less thinking and stunting and all that kind of stuff, just really get downfield and go. So they're definitely seeing like the talents there, and like hopefully it's a good match with the new system that we have with Corey Heatherman.
How about the defensive line specifically? Because I think that could be really one of the strengths of this football team with the way that Mario's building the trenches.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And Pick 6 actually has them ranked as the 9th overall defensive line group in the country. So they definitely see like the talent that we have there. I think it's what, like four or 5 stars that we have in that like position group. So definitely like the time for them to show out this year. A lot of young talent, which really seems to be the story of this team going into the year. So as long as they can take that next step, the early returns that we've been seeing from like practice training camp that's coming up soon is going to really be a good indicator of where they're going to be at getting into that first big game against Notre Dame.
So you mentioned pick 6 has Miami, in the top 10, a little bit more. Most of the publications have Miami rated somewhat highly, but they're the ones who are the most bullish. What is their outlook on Miami's season this year in terms of wins and losses, milestones, ACC Championship game? Do they get into the college football playoff? How do they look at all that stuff?
Yeah, they have us going to Charlotte and playing against Clemson. The drop off from like what their predictions and rankings were, ours was going to be 9th. The next team that's on that list is Georgia Tech at 24th. So they're saying there's a wide gap in the talent right there from like one team to the next. They have us going to Charlotte. I don't think they have us winning the ACC, but they have us playing Georgia in the first round of the playoffs, which would be a really fun game to watch.
I've noticed something that I don't think they're the only publication that has Miami matching up with Georgia. And then I think there's and some of these folks, they start to run together, because I check out all these from, again, Phil Steele, Athlon, Lindy's, Pick 6. Like there's a couple of them that have Miami matching up with Georgia. There's at least one that has Miami matching up with Oregon. And so you talk about storyline potential, Phil. Like if we could potentially get, Carson Beck versus his old team and the Georgia fans, all the trash they talk about that kid, or, Mario Cristobal versus his old stomping grounds in Oregon. Like I guess I hope we get something like that, because the ratings would be through the roof.
Oh yeah. And honestly, just with this recruiting cycle too, I feel like it's been a playoff game with Georgia every week with different recruits. So kind of tying that together in the college football playoff would be a really fun way to tie it, like send off that entire storyline.
Is there anything else from the Pick Six preview that maybe surprised you a little bit, good or bad? They're like, okay, wow, I can't believe they said that.
So this is kind of a double-edged sword, but they have like their team ratings from last year, and they had Miami rated 7th, which is a good rating, but it just goes to show where the deficiencies were at defense and how great the offense was last year.
Yeah. And in terms of the offense from one year to the next, because of course, the big the elephant in the room is, for as much as I can feel really positively about Carson Beck, Cam Ward is not running through that smoke. And he exceeded everyone's expectations last year, playing his way into the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. And so I guess a question people will bring up, and I believe in Shannon Dawson, but people will wonder, is Miami's offense going to be that dynamic again, or how much of that was on Cam Ward being an absolute magician?
Yeah, I think it just raised the ceiling with what we had with Cam Ward. Just having a player like that is incredibly rare. Even from the spring game last year when we saw him live, it was one of those kinds of things that was like, okay, this guy's for real.
Yeah.
But I just think that the system really is that good. Like Shannon Dawson really has like a system in place. Having a Carson Beck, it's still going to be a top level kind of offense. It might not be the number 1 in the country kind of offense, but the hope is that the team gets rounded out on the other side with defense, because defense was such a major issue last year that it didn't matter that we had the number 1 offense in the country by over a touchdown by average. So hopefully this year it's a much more rounded out team, and that's going to bring us further into the college football playoff, ideally.
I'll put you on the spot, Phil. What's your early feeling on Miami's record and how far they're going to go this year?
So I'm going to say that we're going to be in like that 9-3 to 11-1 range. If we go 12-0, great. That's even better.
Yeah.
But the most ideal way that we can like navigate the season is that we don't have any back half issues with the ACC schedule. Like personally, like would it suck to lose to like kind of like a Florida or Notre Dame, like our rivals out of conference? Yeah. But the damage to us is minimal if we lose one of those 2 games as opposed to losing 2 to a Syracuse or a Pitt or something like that. So ideally, I'd rather like lose those 2 games, because at the end of the year, if those 2 teams are ranked as high as they're predicting, it's not going to really come against us in the committee meeting or in our ACC schedule to be able to go to Charlotte.
Well, we always appreciate talking with Phil Rusomano, who has, I brag at the start of every show that I'm a University of Miami alumnus. This dude has 3 times as many degrees as I have. I got 1 degree at Miami. He is a triple cane. Which, if you don't mind me asking, if you want to flex a little bit, what degrees do you have from Miami?
So I did the undergrad in finance and economics, my first master's in business analytics, and then just recently I was valedictorian for the MBA program.
Dude, I mean, that is a flex right there. Valedictorian right here. I'm talking to one of the smartest guys on campus. We appreciate your time as always, my friend. Where can people find you on social media?
I'm gonna be on Twitter or X now, psizzle22684.
By the way, for valedictorian, I feel like P-Sizzle. Like, did you come up with that in middle school? Like well, what is that?
I was a big fan of Terrell Suggs, so he was T-Sizzle. So.
Okay, that makes sense. All right. Oh man, like you think, valedictorian, his handle is P-Sizzle. Like I always thought that was a little bit of a disconnect there. We'll work on that. We appreciate Phil Rusomano. Make sure you check him out. Guys, we should have a fun weekend coming up. I mentioned I'm going to be checking out later this weekend the Beefy King restaurant, which is owned by the family of Miami commit Reese Woodrow. I've been starving for some roast beef all day, quite frankly, so we'll check that out a little bit later on today, and I'll catch up with Reese Woodrow as well. We'll talk to y'all later on another episode of Locked On Canes. We are part of the awesome Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.